everyone.
Hello.
Hey. Okay. So is that good?
Yeah.
Sit close. Or what if we scoot it back just a little bit more?
Yeah, scoot it back.
Okay. We're gonna get this set up and then we're gonna start taking questions.
Well, my neck's like white right now.
Oh my gosh, for a second I thought that was a person like sticking his head behind when they
It
came
is a
in the
person
room.
sticking their head.
Alright. So nobody's there yet. We're gonna be doing, I'm gonna start as soon as Stacy gets on.
Stacey,
Since I tagged her, I'm gonna answer Stacy's question. And today for our, we got 2 viewers. For our Ask an Unschooler broadcast, we're gonna be talking specifically about unschooling and home education with kids who have extra needs is what we're calling it. So this goes beyond just the kind of special needs category. And we'll get into that, kind of what that means and everything. Hey, Heather. All right, so we had 3 viewers, and I'm kind of waiting on Stacy because Stacy asked a question that we have ready to go, and then we'll just take other questions as they come in. But I think maybe what we can do first is talk about your experience. So I have a child that has severe autism, and then I have 2 other kids who have pretty mild extra needs. Both of them have sensory processing differences, and one of them has OCD, the other one has social anxiety, but they pretty much present as neurotypical, kids most of the time for the most part. And then my oldest has undiagnosed dysgraphia. I don't think he would have been diagnosed with dyslexia, but I think dysgraphia would have been the diagnosis that he might have gotten. So he has that kind of learning difference. And then just his learning style. He's a kinesthetic and auditory learner, so his learning style didn't really fit in with the way they do things at school. So, that would be, I guess, another learning difference. So that's where I'm coming from. And then Gracie is an unschooler, lifelong unschooler.
Hi, it's me.
That y'all met in the last couple of videos. And she, well, I'll let you tell the story.
Oh, well,
She was diagnosed.
I was diagnosed with ADD when I was probably 14 or 15. And
so tell everybody we'll get into it a little bit more, but you just said something before we started about, so your mom, even though you had ADHD or ADD, you weren't diagnosed because your mom just kind of managed whatever, differences that you had from your ADD just by unschooling. So tell me what you said again.
Well, I think if you're ADD, at least for me, it was really easy to manage it with the unschooling philosophy, with the self-directed learning. It's a lot easier because when you sit an ADD person down to do worksheets, it's not going to happen.
Or there'll be a battle and some kind of,
And the only times
there'll be tears for sure.
The only times I struggled was in those moments of panic when my parents were like, my kids don't know anything, we have to make them do things. And so that's when I struggled the most, and yeah.
So there were a few times over the years that and I think most unschooling parents can relate to those moments of like, oh my gosh, my kid's 7 and he's not reading, the same way his cousins are, or my kid is, this age and he doesn't know times tables, or my kid's, this age and, they're not doing blah, 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 blah that I did in school at that age. So, it's a very common thing with unschoolers to kind of have those freak out moments and then say, okay, well, we're going to do some math worksheets or, whatever. And I would disagree that, I don't know, well, maybe your dad, but from talking to your mom, I don't think that she thought, oh my God, my kids don't know anything.
No. That was my dad. It was
right. But
her
it's more
trying
like,
to do what my dad wanted. So she implemented it, but it wasn't her idea, and she really kind of hated it.
Right. And I think really what the freak out is not that my kids don't know anything, it's that they don't know the things that I knew at this age, at this time. You know, they're not learning in the order that normally it happens in school, or the topics are covered in school.
Right.
There's a debate on whether the learning actually happens, right, if you retain it. But since the information that you learn isn't obtained in the same order as it goes in school, then that's, you know, the don't know anything. It's because I think even your dad would have to admit, oh, my kids know lots of cool things, you know, but it's just not.
And now that we're
the
grown
same
up,
timeline.
You know, that we're grown
school.
up, he sees that it wasn't detrimental to our growth as human beings, that we didn't sit and do worksheets for hours on hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a great, just your example of, you know, just unschooling, just basic unschooling is a way to, you know, deal with and accommodate kids' different kinds of extra needs and, you know, learning differences and other kinds of neurological differences, and even physical differences, right?
Yeah.
That there's nothing extra needed, right? Like, so if you just unschool with most extra needs kids, you don't really have to do anything different than an unschooler of a typical kid would do, because the fact that you're unschooling, the fact that you're following your kid's lead, the fact that you're, you know, allowing them to explore the world in the order that makes sense to them, that makes sense to their brain, that makes sense to the, you know, building on the knowledge that they already have, that makes learning happen a lot easier, and you don't end up, you know, having to do the worksheets as often, or you know, having those freak out moments, because you're able to see, you know, oh, well, you know, he doesn't know his times tables, but look what he's doing over here. You know, look at all this stuff. And so then, you know, that the times tables can work their way in there, you know, whenever it becomes appropriate to the child, necessary for the child's experience, you know, when a kid.
Yeah, I like necessary for the child's experience.
Right.
Because, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, because, I mean, I've been told all my life, like, you need to know math. You need to know math because you're going to need math for the rest of your life. It's like, I don't know that I'm going to need math for the rest of my life. And if I need math for the rest of my life, I can look it up. Because we have computers now. We have computers in our pockets. We have pocket computers that can tell us anything we want to know, pretty much. And it's like, learning algebra when I was 12 wasn't something I feel like I need now. I don't regret not knowing.
As a 12-year-old, it doesn't really make sense to a lot of 12-year-olds, right? That, like, okay, we're doing this, what is this letter N in the math problem all of a sudden? And that causes lots of, like, you know, problems in learning and understanding algebra. So and there are, you know, some kids that are really interested in it naturally, but not that many, right? Because they're not, you know, architects that are designing a building and they need, you know, to know these formulas. And so if a kid decides later that he wants to be, or she wants to be an architect, you know, there's plenty of time to take those math classes. So we've talked a little bit about this in the 2 previous episodes. So I'm going to refer you guys to those. And I'm going to start looking at questions. If you can keep talking about that.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to see what
I was going to say, so if a kid, like, wants to be an architect, then they will go out and they will do the things necessary to become an architect or a mathematician, and generally they will have interest in that when they're young. And I think for me, I've always been an artistic person. I've always, like, wanted to draw, wanted to paint, wanted to play music, wanted to sing. And, you know, that doesn't require math. And so I was, like, really, really put off to the idea of ever doing math, because it's like, I knew that I was never going to go into a field of, well, I want to teach math at a high school or something. Like, I mean, that's great if you want to do that, but I knew that I never really wanted to, and so when I was forced to do math, I felt like it was like just like putting me down as the person I was.
Like self-esteem.
Yeah, kind of like, you have to learn math or you're going to be stupid and you're not going to be able to get a job. And I'm like, well, what if I don't want to get a job doing math all the time?
Right.
You know?
So there's a great TED Talk on that, and maybe somebody watching will remember the guy's name, but he's a middle school math teacher, and he does a cool TED Talk on how all the stuff that you learn, all of the critical thinking skills that you learn in higher math can be taught playing games and doing puzzles and logic games and that kind of stuff. And so his argument is that because only about 1% of adults need, that kind of higher math in their jobs, that we don't need to teach every kid higher math. We can teach those same critical thinking skills through the other means, the games and the logic puzzles and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a lot easier to learn. Something else you just said. Oh, how old were you when you felt pretty certain that you weren't going to pursue a career that needed, higher math?
Oh my God. I honestly never thought, I never thought about a career until I was like 12. You know? I just play until I was 12. And I was like, hey, I'm 12 and in 8 years I'll be 20. And then I'll probably be an adult by then. So I might want a job. And I was just like,
so I don't really have to. It's not like you were. So I guess it's hard to pinpoint an age because you kind of never thought you were going to do that. But when did you feel really like when you were 12? You probably thought, well, maybe one day I'll get interested in architecture.
I was
when were you pretty sure?
I remember thinking well, one day I might enjoy doing math all the time. So I guess I'll just do it because my dad says to do it, And so I was like, I'll just trudge through this, and then one day I won't ever have to do math again. And look where I am now.
All right, so we've got some questions.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You mentioned something about games and puzzles.
Yeah.
And I want to make it clear that I do know math. I
right.
just never sat down and I did sit down and do it actually. I did it with Micron Math, where they used Cuisenaire rods, because I'm a very kinesthetic person, and so to have something to visually see, this is a number. If you don't know what Cuisenaire rods and you're a homeschooler, then
they know.
I don't know. I don't know where you've been.
Google it.
Yeah, I did that when I was a lot younger, and then when I was really young, there was a game. I think it was back in the 90s. I don't know if they make it anymore, but it's Math Blaster.
Oh yeah.
Math Blaster and Reading Blaster and Jumpstart First Grade. And honestly, they seem like they're games, and they are. But I really did learn a lot from playing Jumpstart First Grade and Reading Blaster and Math Blaster.
Right, and so a kid with ADHD isn't going to sit and do worksheets, and so, and my son, which, I don't think he has ADHD, but the school thought he had ADHD, and so we did, investigate that avenue just a little bit, and the doctor was like, no, I don't think so, but he is a highly creative, not a worksheet kid, and so all of the math that he's learned has been through Legos, has been through, any video games that he's played, and then just from living in the world. So, I remember the first time that he realized, multiplication, 2 times 4, and, he was kind of figuring it out in his head, and so then we talked about it with some manipulatives, and, and then we didn't drill any multiplication tables. We just, every once in a while, something would come up in life that required multiplication, and I would just notice, was he able to figure that out? Oh yeah, he was. Or if he isn't able to figure it out, I would be like, oh yeah, when it's a 2-digit number, blah blah blah. And then yeah. Anyway, we're kind of getting off. Well, I don't know. It's on topic.
It's on topic.
It's about all the different ways that you can learn different things, and
right.
and you don't even have to be doing a math video game either. Houston never did any math video games. He just did other kinds of video games.
Right. There is.
Okay, so yes, I will, the TED Talk, I will put a link, and if Delia comes on, she'll probably know which one I'm talking about and might be able to link it, but I will put the link to the TED Talk later.
Did we talk about that same TED Talk in a couple videos
I think we did, yeah, but no, we were talking about
different
Sugata Mitra, which is not the math guide. Okay, so I want to answer some of these questions because the first one that Heather asked now has disappeared, and it was about labels. Okay, so this is kind of a big controversial topic in the unschooling community because when we've already talked about this a little bit, that it is true that if you have a kid with pretty mild extra needs that doesn't have really severe differences that are far off of the bell curve, then pretty much just sticking to unschooling principles, allowing your kid to explore and learn in the way that makes sense to them is going to be enough, of an intervention, right? It's just not doing school at home, right? Would be enough, like it was for you and your brothers. Your mom just unschooled, did a few worksheets here and there when dad was freaking out, but mostly y'all unschooled and just explored the world in that way, which was then did not require any sort of ADHD drugs or any sort of behavioral interventions or anything like that, right? Okay, so there are a lot of unschoolers who will say that labels aren't necessary, right? That we don't even need to get a diagnosis for our kids. Like your mom, she didn't need a diagnosis for you until you were 15, and I don't know what led to y'all deciding to get a diagnosis. You want to talk about that?
Well, because I was 15 and I was going to do the same thing my brother did, go to Richland College, do the program, and so they wanted me to get tested.
Which is community college,
where
you can do a dual credit.
I forget that.
It's okay. It's a dual credit program, so you can get high school and college credits at the same time at the community college. So you were going to Richland.
So I was getting to the age where I was going, and I was going to go to the community college, and then also like with ADD, it's not always just learning. Like my room has always been like a pigsty, and I had always had trouble like collecting my thoughts and having an order in which to like do things so that I could do it without it feeling overwhelming. And so they figured, I think they figured that if I had a diagnosis, that maybe if they put me on drugs, that it would help me
to be able to do Richland.
To be able to do Richland, to be able to organize my life, to become a civilized adult in society.
Okay, so you had an external motivation that you wanted to try to fit into the school system, and so that's when you investigated the diagnosis. So that kind of supports the whole, label argument that you don't need labels if you're just going to unschool, right? And I agree with that to a point, because there are a lot of kids who have maybe multiple extra needs or certain ones that are more severe or affect their ability to do things in different ways, that it is helpful to get a label or to get a diagnosis, or even just to investigate. You don't have to necessarily get a diagnosis. You might just read up on the things that you think might be happening with your kid, because that label or that diagnosis can help you give you a direction to how you can help your child navigate the world, in a way that is most comfortable and easiest for your kids. So I don't think that I personally don't believe that there's an absolute rule or an absolute, unschooling principle that a label is not unschooling, or that it's somehow gonna harm unschooling. I think what harms unschooling is the level of deschooling of the parent. And so that needs to be happening always. The parents always need to be deschooling the entire time that really the kids are at home. Because we have so much programming to undo in terms of our schoolish beliefs and all of our beliefs about how learning should work and how it should look, and the things that teachers and parents need to do in order to help kids learn, which is really opposite of what we know as from experience with unschoolers, and then through research like Peter Gray's research and some others who have looked at how humans learn just from an evolutionary standpoint. We know that learning happens naturally in a way that looks very different from what happens at school. So if a parent is continually deschooling and they are wondering about something that problem that their kid is having, often the label can be very helpful in terms of helping the kid just navigate their world and navigate their life more easily.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, when you talked about Richland, I thought maybe, I mean, we can ask your mom, you might not remember this, but I wonder if she was also thinking that you might get some accommodations at Richland. Like, if you have ADHD, sometimes you get more time on a test, or, you know, if you have dyslexia, they'll read you the test questions and things like that. So
yeah, that actually was one of the reasons.
Okay.
But it never happened because I was put on Vyvanse right away. And so when you're on drugs, cute kids, it takes away all of the symptoms, and you kind of, I mean, I was a zombie. It was not fun, and it was terrible, and I don't take them anymore. I don't take them for years, but I'm not saying don't.
It's a personal
choice. But I was going to mention that not giving your kid a label, and I think a lot of people don't like to give their kids labels because there's a stigma with learning disorders, with mental illness, with diagnosis in general. Like, if you're ADD, you are different, and different is bad.
Right. And
it's bad to be different. But it's only bad to be different if you're going into a school setting where everybody has to be the same, you know?
Right.
And so it is bad when everybody has to be the same and someone doesn't learn the same.
And you know, I know a lot of parents don't want to label their kid because they don't want other people to treat them differently, right? So that's another thing, and you know, that's a concern for sure.
Well,
but one problem is that a lot of unschooling parents who are anti-label, well, sometimes they don't realize, I guess, what kinds of information, you know, that diagnosis can give you. And the other point just ran out of my head.
Well,
they think that it's a crutch for the parents. So they'll say, oh, well, the parent is just lazy using that label to say, oh, well, we can't unschool, right? We're going to have to buckle down and really, you know, if my kid has dyslexia, there's no way I can just let them learn to read on their own, right? But we know from experience that, you know, kids who have dyslexia can learn to read on their own. They just might do it at a later age. You know, they might need some extra supports to help them. You know, maybe if they get to be 10 or 11 or 12 and they're not reading very well, they'll ask, you know, they'll say, what can I do? You know, and so that's when you go get some books and go get, you know, maybe find a tutor or maybe find somebody that knows about dyslexia and can help you, help your kid learn to read, right? But so I think that's one problem that a lot of unschoolers have, is that they're afraid that the label is going to cause the parents to abandon unschooling or try to, you know, force their kid into some sort of, you know, learning program that could be damaging. I mean, there are a lot of kind of therapies and behavioral intervention, you know, kinds of things that people do to kids that are they're not cool. You know, it's not, and adults who have been through these programs like ADA and you know, some other special needs and special education programs are speaking out and saying, you know, this made my self-esteem worse, this made my anxiety worse, this, you know, caused all these problems for me. And so I think that's what a lot of the unschoolers that don't like labels are trying to avoid. They don't want, you know, they say, oh, well, I'll just accommodate my kids' needs by unschooling. And I think that is a perfectly awesome and what's the word? It works. There we go. So it's a way to accommodate your kids' needs just by unschooling. But my point about the labels is that some kids have issues that are, you know, such that the label or the diagnosis helps the parent with clues and avenues of research to find ways to help the kid. Okay. Oh, yay, that's the TED Talk. Yes, Anne came through with... it's in the comments now. So John Bennett, I need to remember his name. That's a great TED Talk about math. Okay, so I'm going to try to remember the other two questions because Stacy's question was the one we were going to get to, and then Serenity said something about her oldest kid was neurotypical. She unschooled him just fine. He learned, you know, things on his own in his own time, and it all worked out. But her child that's young now, that's unschooling, has special needs and is having a hard time learning some of the social, I guess, social rules, right, of I guess, human interaction. And so he's not just picking up on it the way like his brother did. And so she's feeling frustrated because of that. And so I don't remember exactly what her question was, but in terms of how I would handle that is, that's I think a good example of when the extra need or the diagnosis or the, whatever the differences that your kid has, it is helpful to research, what are ways that people have helped, kids that are not picking up on social cues and social interaction, body language, that kind of stuff. What are some ways that I can help my kid learn this stuff, right? And so that's when it is helpful to go into a group for special needs kids and ask other parents, my kid has a hard time with this, this, and this. He's not diagnosed, but I wonder if it's autism. I wonder if it's social anxiety. I wonder if it's, whatever the thing is. What have you done that's helped? And sometimes those answers are not very unschooly, right? It could be, well, you force the kid to go to social skills classes, right? And so I think that's another reason, some unschoolers are hesitant for labels. But what happens is if the parent is working on unschooling and deschooling, they are able to wade through those recommendations, and come to a group like Unschooling Special Needs, where parents have found alternatives to ABA and social skills class and, some of those other things, and that are more child-centered and more respectful and more compatible to unschooling, and they're able to implement those kinds of things to help, like with acquiring social skills, for one example. So Serenity, if I didn't answer your question very well, then just type it in again, because for some reason it only lets me see 3 at a time. Okay, so here is the question from Stacy. How do I, as an active ADHD adult, and my husband is the same, how do we incorporate this into our home family in a way that they're really learning and engaging and we're not missing things? Okay, so I'm just going to take part of this question first. So how can I incorporate unschooling with Charlotte Mason? Okay, so I don't know a ton about Charlotte Mason, but in terms of incorporating anything into unschooling, whether you choose to, look at some Waldorf stuff or Montessori stuff or Charlotte Mason, if it's the child's choice, so if I come home, with all this stuff that's like out of the Charlotte Mason curriculum, and you can strew it, and that just means leaving it about the house so the kids can discover it, or you could, just kind of introduce it to your kids in a way that, is very no pressure, low pressure, just this is available. If you're interested in it, let's explore it. If you're not interested, that's fine. That would be the unschooling approach, where if the kid's not interested, you don't force it, right? You wait until they're ready. So that would be how you would want to incorporate unschooling with Charlotte Mason. But in terms of ADHD, I think that the biggest thing that you can do in terms, and I know you said your kids are like 2 and like 2 weeks and 2 years old, you've got time to deschool. So what I would suggest is reading a lot, watching videos, talking to other unschooling parents, go on the unschooling groups, and just deschool yourself. So when you are able to fully understand and fully get on board with the principles of unschooling and understand that human learning, happens not in the way really that school does it, but the way that it naturally happens doesn't look much like what school does, then your deschooling and your stress levels in terms of like staying organized, I know that was part of her question that she posted before, is how do I stay organized as an ADHD mom? So the organization looks a lot different when you're unschooling compared to when you're doing school at home. So when you can fully embrace the principles of unschooling, then the way you stay organized, or the way that you even measure whether your kids are learning or not, changes a lot from probably the way that you're thinking about it now. So that would be my #1 recommendation to any parent that has any kinds of organizational issues, or like executive functioning is what you were describing with like having a hard time cleaning up your room, yeah. Right? Like, so if you have executive functioning issues, then it's hard to take a look at a chaotic situation and kind of mentally like make a plan, right? And so, but when you fully embrace unschooling, you understand that learning really is chaotic. When you're watching your kids learn, it's not linear. It's not, it doesn't look usually much like what's happening at school, and you can't really get the kids to regurgitate facts or, perform in terms of multiplication tables or those kinds of things, because the learning is so, well, it seems chaotic, but to the learner it makes sense, because you don't really learn and retain something unless you've learned the things you need to know, the prerequisites. And those prerequisites for learning a certain thing are different for every person, right? It's the connections you make in your brain, in terms of like, oh, this, I've learned the word ball and the word blue, and I'm putting it together because I've learned the word blue and because I've learned the word ball. I can put it together to say that's a blue ball, right? Like that's how a child would learn language, is making those connections. But they can't learn that something's a blue ball until they've learned the word blue, and then they've learned the word ball separately, right? And then they can make that connection. So when that continues throughout life, right? Unless we've already kind of learned enough basic stuff about a topic, we're not going to learn a more advanced concept that has to do with it, or we're not even going to be interested in the advanced concept of that topic until we've learned, some of the more basic stuff.
And like you said, your kids are really young. I know for me, when I was really young, when I was about 4 or 5, a lot of learning was ruined by that time for me, because, my dad had the early freakouts, and even my mom did at that point, because she was really new to all of this, and so they did do the forcing you to sit down. And so then, after that time, it was, hey, great. Then she tried those methods, like, hey, Gracie, look at this cool thing, and I'm like, oh, that's what that learning thing is. And I didn't
she's
like that.
She's trying to get me to do that learning thing.
Yeah, she's trying to get me to do that learning thing. And learning became like a word that I didn't really like when I was young, because I was like, nope, I just want to play. And so if you start out by not forcing them, I think learning becomes a very positive word. It can be really, really fun, and especially since your kids are 2 and how old?
2 weeks, I think.
2 and 2 weeks.
They're little.
See?
So so there's 2 things that this is bringing up for me. When you have little kids, you see them learning, right? They're learning because you see them develop. You see them increase in their skills, increase in their abilities, increase in the words they can say and the things they can do, right? And so we don't decide, well, we're starting to have curriculums for preschoolers, that are more strict or whatever, but mostly people accept the fact that preschoolers can learn things without forced learning stuff, right? Forced activities. So, and unschooling just means that you continue that learning process in that same way past, age 5. You apply the principle that all kids and humans can learn when they're curious about something, when they're interested in something. You apply that to the rest of their lives. So you really aren't going to have to change that much, right? If you're providing, a rich environment of experiences and, opportunities for your kids to explore and find interests to delve into deeper, then that's all really you need to do. The organization in terms of like reporting for homeschooling requirements for each state is kind of different, and so there are like apps and all kinds of software to help with that. You can just journal. You can just every day or every week write down some of the activities that you do, and then in the margin say, oh, that was kind of math related, that was kind of science related, and a lot of the things will have more than one category, attached to it, and so then you have at least some kind of record of, like these activities that we did covered these things. So that's one way that you can kind of stay organized. And I think, did I say both things? I guess so. Okay. It's freezing. I heard you say you're going to answer my question. Oh, and it won't let me on. Oh no, Stacy. Okay, so hopefully, Stacy, you'll be able to see the replay. Yeah. I'll message her about that. Okay. So Well, all the other questions are gone now.
Should refresh it.
I
Click
don't know.
on the post. Click the...
Oh, then maybe I could see all the things.
Yeah.
See, that's why we have Gracie around.
Media goddess. I know all the media.
Oh no, it's still not letting me.
Well, did you press the post? Because it'll go to
Yeah.
a separate thing where you can...
Like that? Sorry about the technical difficulties. There's some... Okay, now she said perfect thanks. Okay. So, hopefully Stacy was able to hear all of those suggestions that we had. But yeah, you can go. Okay, so let's see. OCD and an ADHD brain too. Anyway, as a parent, I want to be able to help my kids learn best. Yes. So I think that even if you have OCD on top of your ADHD, I'm going to recommend that you look into heavy metal detox. Anybody that has an anxiety disorder or anxiety, depression, ADHD, even allergies and asthma, heavy metal detox can help alleviate those symptoms for a lot of people. So that's just my biomed plug on those kinds of issues. Okay, yay, she heard it. Yay, Stacy.
Yay.
Thanks for your question, Stacy. Let us know if you have something else. And so I'm trying to think. So Serenity asked the question about social stuff. I really like the sunrise approach to encouraging social interaction. It's an alternative to ABA. You go for a week to Massachusetts to learn the program. You can there's a startup package that's, I think it's $100, and you get several books and some DVDs. So you can learn it from that. You can learn it from their YouTube videos, but I highly recommend going for the week to do the startup training and learn about the sunrise approach, because it is very child-centered, respectful approach to encouraging social connection and social interaction for kids who have a hard time with that kind of stuff. You can get a scholarship. We got, I think, about a half scholarship, and it depends on your income. So we got a plane ticket donated. So I got there, was able to get there, and then your tuition includes room and board. So if you get a full scholarship and you can, just get there to Massachusetts, then it can be a very low cost way to provide, basically it's training the parents in these techniques so you use those for the rest of your life with all of your kids. I used the sunrise approach with my youngest child, who doesn't, she has very mild extra needs. She's social anxiety and a little bit of sensory processing differences, but I used sunrise approach just being her parent, right? Just working on potty training, or helping her understand how to interact with her friends, and stuff like that. So yeah. It's not just applicable to kids with special needs, but yeah, that's one thing that I like for social helping kids who have difficulties with social interaction. And Serenity knows about that because we post it in the Unschooling Special Needs all the time. Oh, I know one thing we need to do. So I'm going to be speaking at the Life Without Instructions Conference in New York City.
Hey, that's cool.
It's September 20th. I know it's the week of September 22nd because that's my birthday. But I can't remember the exact dates. But there's a tag. Oh, let's see. I don't know. I'll add a tag so that you guys can see. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a session on unschooling with extra needs, and then I'm going to do a session on Psych K, and then, oh gosh, I forgot. I think we're doing a Desire Map Women's Circle. I can't remember. I'll have to look. It's on the website, lifewithoutinstructions.net, I believe. And yeah, so that's an unschooling conference that is happening
in the
New York City.
So New York area.
I hope you guys will come.
Yeah.
Okay. When do you let their social differences be? Okay. And do you work? Okay, so it seems a fine line between respecting who they are just as they are. Yes, that makes sense, Heather. Okay, so here's kind of my own personal, I guess, approach to this. If a kid, so first of all, I always go to the child-centered approach, right? So one example, and this isn't social, but like my son, we started unschooling. He did kindergarten and first grade, and then we started unschooling, and he was struggling with the reading instruction at school. And so once we left school, then I didn't do, I decided to lay off of any kind of reading instruction because it was causing anxiety. Oops.
Sorry, I'm trying to read the comments on here.
Oh, here, look, just read them on here.
Whoa.
Okay, so, and I was nervous about, he wasn't reading on grade level, when he was like 7, 8, 9, 10. And I was nervous that the other moms at co-op were going to judge me, really is what it came down to. I mean, I guess I was worried they would judge him too, but, that they would be judging him and that he would have a problem or feel bad about himself, have some kind of self-esteem problem. Right. And then they would also be judging me that I hadn't taught him how to read properly. And so rather than force him to do reading instruction, I worked on deschooling myself, which is something I was going to mention earlier, that's why I recommend, if you're freaking out about your kids doing anything on time or whatever, the best option, I think, is working on deschooling yourself. So I decided to ask my kid, do you want to work on reading so that when you're in co-op, if you have to read for the class or some kind of, is this a problem? Do you feel like they're judging you? That kind of stuff. And he was like, no, I don't care. So I realized that it was my issue, right? It was my thing to get over. It was my deschooling that needed to happen. And so, now he's 15, he's reading just fine. He's, his self-esteem about his reading has stayed intact because he, was able to learn it at the rate that made sense to his brain. So, I would apply that same technique to any kind of social skills thing. So if a kid, I notice my kid struggling on the playground with like social interactions and stuff. The first thing I would do is ask my kid, do you want some help when, the kids do this, and, maybe just talk about what you've observed, and then just say, do you want some help with that? Do you want me to give you some ideas of things you could say when somebody does that? Or, so taking the child-led approach, I think is the first thing. And then it's not deschooling, but it's like changing your beliefs about, appropriate social interaction, right? Sometimes people, they're probably never going to make lots of eye contact, right? That might be a thing that, certain people just, it's too uncomfortable. They're never, no amount of ABA or, behavioral intervention is gonna get them to make appropriate eye contact, right?
Yeah,
and
what is appropriate eye contact?
Right, and so, so making a child do social skills classes or do, ABA in order to, get better eye contact is only going to harm their self-esteem and, make them feel like there's something wrong with them. So until the child is coming to me or until I'm noticing the child struggling, if I'm noticing them struggle, then I'm going to say, would you like some help with that? Let's think of some ways that we could, I'll ask around and see if there's some techniques or a book I can read or something I can do to help you with that, that issue. So child-centered approach, respectful to the child, also taking into account that, there are some things that, like we had a Sunrise volunteer that came and he has a speech impediment. He's, he was like 16 at the time, and he was talking about how he did speech therapy for so long, and just finally when he was about 10 or so, he just told his mom, he says, this is the way I talk. It's not gonna get any better if we can, we've been doing this for 5 years and it hasn't improved, and certain sounds that he couldn't make, he's like, this is the way I talk. And so, his mom luckily didn't force him to continue to go to speech therapy. She listened to him, and so he, quit speech therapy at that time. And, he's still, like Barbara Walters, has a little bit of a speech impediment. Yeah. But, he's living his life perfectly happily, and much happier because he doesn't have to go to speech therapy.
I think sometimes a lot of stuff like that is learning to be comfortable and happy with yourself. And I know that with kids, like, most of the time, kids don't become self-conscious until their parents make it, like, about them.
An issue, yeah.
Make it an issue. So they're like, well, I didn't feel stupid before, but now I feel kind of stupid because Mom suggested I should read more.
Right, right.
Yeah, so then...
Yeah, and you know, kind of the broader answer to that question is, you know, connection with your child. You know, Delia in our unschooling special needs group is always going to bring up the attachment issue, right? If there's a healthy attachment between parent and child, then there's going to be, you know, the communication, there's going to be the give and take in terms of, you know, the feedback, to know if something's a problem and if it's something that we need to, you know, look for outside help on. You know, as long as you're tuned into your child and communicating with your child and, you know, talking a lot about, well, you know, lots of people are different. Some people make more eye contact and some people make less eye contact. And if you really want to work on your eye contact, then I'm happy to find some ways to help you work on your eye contact. But if it's too uncomfortable for you, or if it's too, you know, whatever, then we'll work on the whole self-acceptance aspect of, I just don't make much eye contact. And so maybe, you know, what that kid would do is just when he meets somebody new, he'd just say, you know, I don't like to make a lot of eye contact, but I'm still listening to you, you know, things like that. Just, you know, coping mechanisms that we learn, all of us that have, you know, any kind of difference or weirdness about us, we learn ways to, you know, talk about those things, ask people for accommodations in terms of, you know, once you get to be friends with somebody or when you're first becoming friends with somebody, just being honest and saying, you know, I have a hard time with, you know, whatever it is, eye contact or anything else social. I can't think of another example. What would be something else that people would have a hard time with socially?
Well, I notice, you know, there are some...
Or body language. I have a hard time reading body language and facial expressions. And so you can tell people, a lot of folks on the spectrum that I know will say, I cannot read your body language. You're going to have to, you know, say it out loud. You're going to have to be more honest. Direct and more honest and more, you know, because I don't get your body language.
Because, yeah, there's a lot of subtle, unspoken rules about being social with people that's really hard for people on the spectrum sometimes. Because, you know, you're expected to catch on to this thing and then respond in an exact way. And over politeness, there's a whole thing about you have to say please, thank you, and you have to put on airs to people and always be polite to them. And sometimes people are just like, you know what? No, I don't really want to do this, and I'm not going to say yes just to be nice. And so people take that as being really rude and unsociable, and
when really it's just
like, I don't really want to do that, you know. And so I've actually started doing that. When I really don't want to do something, I don't do it, you know. And I tell people, I'm just like, no, I don't really.
No, thank you. Juliana would say, no, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And you can do that. See.
And well, it's really interesting
that,
having kids, you know, with well, especially having a kid on the spectrum, and even, you know, noticing that the ways that I'm on the spectrum myself has been a really, and then unschooling on top of that, meaning allowing the child to develop at their own rate in their own way, is really challenging the ideas that we have about what's acceptable and not acceptable, and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And you know, it's really interesting that when you start unschooling, or even just when you start doing home education, you start to question, like, well, why do we do it that way? Why do, you know, and because my kid's obviously not happy with the way that I'm doing this reading, you know, lesson. You know, my kid's behavior, that's something that's important. Behavior is communication, y'all. Every single bit of behavior is communication. And so if your kid is, you know, having a hard time in any way with the way that you're doing their education, then that means that there's a disconnect that's happening, right? And it's not the kid, most of the time, it's not the kid that needs to be changed, it's the approach that needs to change. And so you know, when we start to kind of follow this different path, we really do begin to question, you know, all these things about, you know, I've learned from experience that I don't need to force my kids to say thank you, you know, starting when they can talk. All I need to do is model and say thank you to everybody around us. If somebody does something for my, you know, little kid, I just say, oh, wow, thanks, you know, and then sometimes my kid will join in on the thanks and sometimes they won't. But yeah. My kids are polite and they say thanks to people because, you know, we've just modeled it. And then if you have a kid that doesn't pick up on those kinds of social cues, then you just say to them, you know, sometimes people expect you to say thank you if, you know, blah, 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 blah. And so then it's up to the kid to decide. And you can talk about things like, you know, sometimes people might think it's rude if you don't say thanks. So it's up to you. Do you want to appear rude or not rude? You know, like, just like, you know, bad words, right? My kids know that some people are not going to be happy if they use certain words. And so armed with that knowledge, then they can choose whether or not to use those words. If they just want to kind of keep the peace with grandma, then they're not going to say those kinds of words around grandma. But if they're, you know, if they...
Don't talk politics around grandma. That's what
right.
my mom used to tell me until recently. And grandma and I found common ground in that we were both not fans of a particular candidate. So that's okay. But yeah.
Oh my
Don't curse in front of grandma if you don't want grandma to be upset.
Right.
And you know, sometimes people don't care. Sometimes kids don't care. And you know, I feel like at that point, it's not going to change anything if you get mad at them every single time that they do that, because they're just going to keep doing it because they don't really care. Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, that's fine. They will have consequences if they sometimes, you know. Right, and you just have to be honest. You know, like, it might be harder to make friends if you know, an asshole.
Don't say thanks to people, or, you know, or
take their toys or like
push
them or something. You know?
Yeah, and so sometimes with the learning the social skills, with some kids it just takes a little more deliberate, you know, saying it out loud, saying it over and over again, you know, just having an understanding that the world outside isn't as understanding oftentimes, and you know, and even talking a lot about how the world should change in order to be more accommodating to people that have differences. And so then, you know, when you start talking about those kinds of things, then kids will often speak up and say, you know, I have a hard time with eye contact, but that doesn't mean I'm not listening, you know, and they'll speak up to other adults, like maybe other, you know, moms of the co-op or something, you know, like, you don't assume that I'm not listening just because I'm doodling on my paper. You know, doodling on your paper sometimes helps you hear and retain information, right? So
for ADD people,
yeah, that's huge.
I hear 5 to 6 sounds at once. If there's a room of people, I am catching bits of like 5 different conversations at once, and just because I'm like not sitting and talking to them doesn't mean that I don't like know what's going on, you know what I mean? And I can listen when I'm doodling, and you know, sometimes, and the thing is that it's not always consistent, because that happens, but then sometimes you hyper focus, right? So you're hyper focused in a thing and you cannot double task, but other times when you not always when you want to you're able to hear like the vents going and the wind blowing and someone like talking and somebody playing like a game and somebody doing all this stuff, and you're just like, yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up something that I was thinking about before we got on today was just the fact that if you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you're not physically comfortable, you know, no learning's going to happen anyway. Right? So that's why school is so hard for kids with extra needs, because, you know, the sensory overload, the just being in the proximity of other people, right? There are a lot of us that are highly sensitive that just being in a room full of 30 people is overwhelming. And so, you know, just taking your kid out of school and giving them, you know, an environment that is less, well, I was going to say toxic, but, you know, less problematic
It can be very toxic.
Yeah.
And I think it can be toxic without people realizing it, you know?
Right. And if you know, so like a lot of the extra needs that my kids have, I have, but just in a more mild way. So I can relate to it, but not necessarily to the degree, right? Like I don't understand the sensory assaults on, you know, that Tristan experiences because my sensory processing issues are much milder than his, right? I can kind of understand a little bit, but you know, there are a lot of parents that maybe don't have any sensory processing issues, but when they have a kid with sensory processing issues, they're, you know, they will discount and say, oh, that's not that loud. How can that bother you? Or, you know, it's not that cold in here, or that fan isn't really blowing very much, you know, like, or whatever the thing is. Like we have a tendency to assume that somebody else's sensory experience is the same as ours, right? Like that fan doesn't bother me, so how could it bother you?
It's a very common theme in humanity, especially right now with lots and lots of different things. Like, you know, just because I'm not like having to use food stamps and feed my family doesn't mean people aren't doing that.
Right, and legitimately needing that
legitimately
help.
needing it, you know.
That's a good comparison,
you know?
Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of joke sometimes, you know, that unschooling will save the world, but I really do think that stepping back from the way that things have always been done and asking questions about why do we do it this way, why do we make these assumptions, really is healing. It's healing for all the parents that are unschooling because we're healing from our, you know, trauma that we had from our school experience or maybe our being parented authoritatively. So we're healing from that. We're also trying to, you know, make the experience better for our kids and, you know, but really the open and honest communication and helping your kid advocate for themselves, I think is a big answer to that question when you were talking about like, when do you just let the kid be? And then right. But I mean, you know, but then sometimes they do need help, right?
Well, you let the kid be until then.
Right.
You
or
always
until you notice. Yeah. So they might not come to you. You might notice behaviorally. That's the communication that I'm talking about. Sometimes the behavior is communicating, is communicating an issue. But, you know, I really do think that kind of unplugging from the way we've always done things is a huge part of our, you know, collective healing that humanity is you know, that's happening right now, that we making assumptions about somebody else's experience is usually not a helpful thing to do, right? It's pretty impossible, to accurately judge somebody else's experience. But it's also, it causes problems in terms of, you know, just honoring and respecting your kid and the things that they're trying to tell you. And whether they're using words or they're using behavior, they're going to tell you when something is a problem. And so if it's a struggle to do schoolwork, if it's a struggle to, you know, do anything, right, that you think your kids should do, then it's time to look at how can we do this thing in a different way. If it's something the kid's wanting to do, that's a real challenge. When you have a kid with extra needs and they really want to read, you know, they're dyslexic but they want to read because their cousins are reading, you know, it's how do we, you know, find a way to help that kid accomplish their goals in the way that, you know, works for them and preserves self-esteem and, you know, gets the job done.
Yeah. And learning is growing and you can't grow with learning until you learn to grow within yourself. Am I using the right words? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I found that in my recent years I've learned a lot more than I have my entire life because I've really dealt with self-esteem issues. I've really dealt with my perception of myself, and like you're saying, if they want to read because their cousin wants to read, they don't want to read because they want to read. They want to read because they feel bad about themselves and they're trying to fix it by learning how to read. But sometimes that's the answer, is wanting to learn to read. Maybe you'll feel better about yourself. But if it's not happening, then that might not be the answer. It might be, well, so what if you can't read? You're really like... You know you're like a great kid. You know you're really smart. You know that's like doesn't make you stupid, and you know.
And like in a case like that, I would talk to other unschoolers where, you know, the kid talked to parents and talked to grown unschoolers who learned how to read at age 13 or 14 or 15, you know, and find out from them their experience and then relay that to your kid and say, you know, there are a lot of kids that don't learn to read until they're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, you know, and this is how it worked out for them. This is, you know, I promise they can read now, you know, right? Like I've talked to these people, going to unschooling conferences is such a great way to, or finding an unschooling community, you know, if you have one near you, and meeting those teenagers and young adults who, you know, maybe had dyslexia and didn't learn to read, you know, on time, but they eventually learned to read. You know, there's such a great story of Ron Davis, who he had autism. He didn't speak till he was 17. By 19, he was doing all kinds of math, got a job at Boeing, made bukus of money at Boeing, but at 38, he retired from Boeing, but still couldn't read very well, right? Because he was dyslexic. So at 38, he kind of broke the code for his own brain and realized what his problem was of why he, you know, he figured out the hurdle, the, you know, disconnect that was happening. And so he taught himself to read at age 38. So it's never too late to learn. And sometimes it just takes finding the right approach, right? And, you know, like, so Ron Davis's book, The Gift of Dyslexia, is a great resource, and then a great example for your kids, you know, that you can learn to read at any age, and really relaxing, getting, you know, dealing with anxiety, dealing with self-esteem problems, dealing with all of those underlying, you know, imbalances is going to create a platform that enables your kid to learn those other skills, you know, whereas it'll be harder to learn when they're still having anxiety about the judgment that their cousin is giving them, you know. So helping, and what kind of, I mean, reading, you can learn to read at any time, right? We just talked about that. But learning coping skills for dealing with somebody that's judging you, you know, unfairly is a much more valuable lesson, I think, than, you know, just, you know, learning phonics or whatever.
It's hard when you're a kid because, you know, adults do that to tiny children all the time. My uncle and aunt did that. They quizzed us when we were really little, and it's like, it feels like really bad, and you don't know how to deal with that when you're a kid. I don't know. I feel like maybe with my kids, I was like, you know, if someone is doing something and you don't feel right about it, really tell me, because it's like, I will kick their ass for you, because it's just not something I would ever want my kid to go through.
And I think that that's a great example of, like, you know, just to answer Heather's question about, you know, you can let them be all the time, you know, and if your kid knows that you have their back and that you're gonna stand up for them no matter what happens, no matter who says what kind of crap, you know, then the kid is gonna have more confidence in being themselves and just being me, and letting them develop at their own pace, letting them, you know, learn the things that make sense to them to learn now, and waiting on the other stuff, than if they feel like they're getting judgment from the parent as well and not being supported.
They're not going to go to someone who they're feeling judged by, you know.
Right.
I know.
So yeah, just making sure that your kids know, and there were times when I realized I had to specifically say that a little bit more blatantly to especially my oldest. You know, because I knew I had his back, but I maybe hadn't communicated that to him sufficiently, or in a way that, you know, he would understand. And so, you know, that's where it goes back to the attachment and the connection. If the child feels secure in the attachment, and they know that, you know, the parent is always going to stand up for them and, you know, support them, rather than, oh no, you're big enough now, you need to go handle that on your, you know, by yourself.
Oh my God.
If a child is needing help with something, you know, and the parent always helps them, rather than saying, oh no, you should learn to deal with that on your own. You know, if you're always just showing with your actions and then also with your words that you're always going to be supportive, then that goes a lot further than any kind of, you know, social skill or academic skill that you can learn, because there's always time to learn that. There's always ways. There's always different approaches to learning those things.
But it's a lot harder to unlearn self-deprecation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to unlearn those patterns that we know from the time we're little because we don't feel like anybody has our back.
Right, the self-doubt.
Yeah.
You know, if your parents never doubt, like, I know you're going to learn to read. I am certain that it is going to happen. I don't know how old you'll be, but I know you're going to do it because I've read all these books and I've talked to all these teenagers and I've, you know, researched this, and I know that it's, you can learn to read at any age, you know, and it will eventually click for you. When your parent has that kind of faith in you, then it's easier to have that kind of faith in yourself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I suffered from a little bit of social anxiety from the time I was little, and you know, as an adult I know that my parents had my back, but I don't think that they had the skills to show that entirely when I was young. You know, so it's not their fault or anything, like there's no blame about how anything turned out, how my self-esteem was affected because of that. It's like not a blame thing. It's that I feel if they were at a place where they were able to always show that they had my back, then yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have had self-esteem issues, but can't really change that.
Lord only knows.
You just gotta,
right?
yeah, exactly.
But I think that goes to the point of, you know, when in doubt, work on yourself, right?
Yeah.
As a parent, it's way more often that we need to, you know, not point the finger at, oh, I need to change my kid, or I need to do this to my kid, or do this approach, or do this therapy, or it's what can I change about the way I'm thinking and feeling about the situation to make it more clear, or, you know, or increase the connection with my kid so that I can find the right approach to help him. You know, so often we just kind of get upset because we notice that there's a problem with our kid, or, you know, a struggle that our kid's going through, and rather than, you know, turning inward and listening to our intuition and listening to that connection that we have with our kid, we look out there, you know, we look at all the you know, kind of mainstream advice about disorders, right? You know, and then we get scared, you know, what if my kid never learns to read? So, and then we're not able to have that clear,
that rational voice.
Yes, that can help us find, you know, the things that can help our kid rather than kind of frantically, you know.
I think that's what happened to my parents, is that they really learned that by the time Samuel was born, by the time Samuel was
So Gracie has a much younger sibling. Is he 7, 8 years younger?
6.5.
6.5. Okay. So yeah, the oldest kids always get the experimental or the learning. I'm the oldest, and you know the younger siblings do get kind of a better deal in the sense that, you know, parents learn as they go, right?
Yeah.
It's an on-the-job training kind of situation.
How many times have I gone to my mom and been like, well, why wasn't I allowed to do that when I was young? You know?
Right. Well, we're over an hour.
Whoa.
Wow. Okay, so maybe we should wrap it up. I'm going to plug the Life Without Instructions conference one more time and put a link. So I'm going to be speaking at that. I've got 3 different sessions that I'm doing, and there's going to be lots of awesome presenters and speakers and session leaders, and then tons of activities for the kids. Oh, and she said that May 20th is the last day for early bird registration. So register now to get the early bird price.
It's too expensive.
Shut up. Maybe you can come with me.
Maybe I could be your guest speaker.
Let's
I could do live video things
at the conference.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, Ann? Gracie's offering to do what? Periscope, the Life Without Instructions conference. That'd be pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, right. So yes, so the conference, for anybody that is looking at the price and thinking that they might not be able to do it, I believe that she has some. I don't know if she's calling it volunteer opportunities, but if you want to help out with the conference, with something at the conference, you can get or talk to Ann. I should say, talk to Ann about figuring out some sort of tuition assistance. No, but she posted
She
the
did. She posted
link.
the link,
So you
yeah.
can PM and talk to her about payment arrangements or some sort of tuition assistance if you want to help out at the conference, because most unschooling conferences do that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And Gracie
Not
has
cheap to unschool. Let me tell you.
Not cheap.
It's not cheap to unschool.
We just had a thing about unschooling on a budget.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're on a budget and you want to go to the conference, you can. No, that's why I'm saying that there are always those opportunities to volunteer, because they know that there are families that can't
Okay, yeah.
pay all that.
So the way you said it was like, it's expensive to unschool. That's what I heard you saying.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah, it can be pricey to go to these conferences, but
there
are opportunities to.
Yeah. No, that's what I meant. I meant that conferences cost money.
Right.
They cost money.
Rightfully so, because there's a lot of planning
and there's a lot of like
into it.
In order to get all these resources, sometimes you gotta have money. Sometimes, but not if you're unschooling on a budget.
So you can look at, I don't know, 1 or 2 times ago we talked about unschooling on a budget. That's in the videos section.
That was the last time, wasn't it?
I think it might have been, yeah, because we skipped like 2 weeks. Okay, so what did you want to say?
Well, this is Django, and he's my dog, and he's my baby, and I love him. I wanted to plug him in, so he was sleeping, and I woke him up.
Poor
Look at him,
Django.
his life. This is his
He
life.
didn't sign a photo release.
Blur his face. He can't look. He's got a little gimp arm. That's his dominant arm.
He has special needs.
Django's a special needs chihuahua. He has a purple heart. Django was born in my bed.
So Lisa Ruiz just joined. Do you have any questions? Oh, here we go. Speaking of skills, somebody has a question.
Oh, wait.
So we'll answer these last couple questions and then. Speaking of skills, how do you help a child who has anger issues? Mostly does not have the coping skills when frustrated. I have been modeling breathing and some other coping skills. I'm not getting it across properly. Verbiage that might help explain coping skills. Okay, so Sunrise offers some ways to deal with this. So look on their videos on their website, and you might find some ideas. And but in terms of verbiage, wireless connect. Oh, I wonder if did we forget to, I didn't sign into the Wi-Fi at your house, or maybe I don't know. Maybe
You're using all your data.
Okay, well, anyway, so just cultivating awareness of internal states like anger and that kind of thing is pretty huge in terms of helping a kid cope, because they can't cope if they don't recognize that the thing is happening. Doesn't have the coping skills when frustrated. You know, biomedical healing has been my approach to helping those kinds of issues. So detox and supporting brain function, supporting digestion, supporting any kind of neurological communication through a biomedical approach has been the way that I have approached that, besides Sunrise. I mean, Sunrise will give you lots of tips for, you know, a child that, oh, and then the explosive child. So I was going to say, if you have an explosive child, Sunrise can help with that, but there's a book called The Explosive Child, and I haven't read it, but the Unschooling Special Needs group recommends that book often. And there are files. If you join the Unschooling Special Needs group on Facebook, there are files, and in the file section, they've collected links and made files about some of these different issues that our kids face, so that you can go there and find ideas and techniques and read about these techniques from the perspective of parents who are interested in having a child-centered and respectful approach rather than just forcing a therapy on a kid. You know, this is a very thoughtful group of parents who, you know, really have the connection and the attachment to the child at the forefront of any approach that they take. So it's really helpful to read kind of, you know, I liked this therapy because it was, you know, blah, blah, blah. It allowed me to take my child's specific challenges into account or whatever. So, so that's one way or one resource is to go to the Unschooling Special Needs group and look at the file section. But it's way worth it. Okay, so Anne says it's way worth it, right, Gracie? To go to do, okay, volunteer opportunities are still available for the Life Without Instructions conference. So if you volunteer for certain jobs, then you can get some reduction in your tuition or your registration fees. And so her question is, isn't it worth it to pay for an unschooling conference?
Of course.
It is worth every penny, because, you know, even if, I don't know how much LWI is, but like with, you know, Rethinking Everything, it was $99 a person for the
registration,
or the early bird registration, and the amount of resources and sessions that you get, over 4 days, and I think Life Without Instructions is 5 days. I mean, if you just think, like, you couldn't take 5 yoga classes for $100, you know?
Right.
But you've got all day for 5 days of different classes and activities and stuff going on for the kids. So yeah, it is worth every penny. It seems to add up when you're paying for your entire family, but you have to get creative, just like with any kind of unschooling on a budget. You know, you just have to get creative in terms of figuring out a way to make it happen.
Some people make that their trip every year. They go, we're going to go to this conference and save up for the year, you know?
Right. That's
it's hard to do right now for the Life Without Instructions conference. Right now?
Oh yeah, well you have till September.
Oh, well, September.
Yeah, so you got the whole summer to save up.
Get your kids to work.
Yeah, lemonade stand, man.
So, okay,
raise
but
money.
Here's the thing about America in 2016. You can't have a lemonade stand anymore.
You can't?
It's illegal in most places.
What?
Because you're going to poison the lemonade.
Because you don't have a health permit or whatever.
Permit. It's like 6-year-olds need health department permits now. What if their dream is to own a food truck one day?
Right.
How are they going to?
Well, so if you're going to do food at like a farmer's market or something, if you're going to do prepared food, you just have to get a permit. So sometimes that can cost a little bit of money, but you know, if your kid really does have a dream of owning a food truck and wants to, you know, set up a baked goods station at the local farmer's market, you know, you can get a permit in order to sell prepared foods. All right.
I think I'll chop Django up and sell him.
Ew.
For food.
Did you say chop?
Yeah, because he's so cute. Don't you just want to eat him?
All right, well, we're going to sign off, I think. So thanks, everybody that watched. And we're going to try to do another Ask an Unschooler video next Tuesday. So Tuesday's our day.
Yeah.
Well, if it's going to happen, we'll post that it's going to happen soon. So you can just...
But no guarantees.
Check the space. Well, because unschooling is an unpredictable lifestyle. So sometimes, yeah, like the last 2 weeks we weren't able to do it, but
it's okay because we're back this week.
We're gonna so we're gonna try to do that on Tuesdays. So we'll see y'all next time. Bye. Let's see how I turn this up.
Oh, there you go. Bye.